Hello, today we're looking at, I think, the most expensive road in the UK. The 16-mile stretch opened in 2020 and cost a mere £1.5 billion. Billion? Wow! We're in for a treat today then, because for that cost, it must be amazing. What we're looking at is the A14 that runs from Cambridge to Huntingdon. It accounts for only a small section of the A14, which runs for 127 miles in total from the Catthorpe interchange to Felixstowe. And Felixstowe is a port town, so essentially the A14 connects the M6 motorway to the ports at Felixstowe, making it a fairly important road. The thing is, before 2020, the A14, despite being a fairly major road, in this area was a bit shit. It used to follow this route and it would have taken you through the centre of Huntingdon and over a couple of roundabouts before carrying on its way, but one of these roundabouts... Hi, mate. It used to follow this route and it would have taken you through the centre of Huntingdon and over a couple of roundabouts before carrying on its way. But one of these roundabouts is also where the A1 is situated, another major road, perhaps you've heard of it, and predictably the traffic in the area was a nightmare. Furthermore, in the centre of Huntingdon was a bridge or viaduct on which the A14 ran across, and it was very soon to collapse because it was old and haggard. The ultimate goal was to demolish it and remove the heavy traffic from Huntingdon by way of building a new bypass. £1.5 billion later, and here it is, the A14 Cambridge to Huntingdon bypass, which, as I said, is around 16 miles long, and it connects the previously existing A14 to the M11. And if you've ever driven along it, you might be fooled into thinking it's a motorway. It's got 3 running lanes in each direction with those emergency lay-bys, massive overhead gantries and those little radar things. Wait a minute, this is a smart motorway, isn't it? Not quite, but we'll come back to that. Let's take a look at the actual road, and we begin at the GIRTON interchange where the A14 makes a sharp turn, the M11 starts, and there's also the A428 thrown in for good measure. The interchange used to look very different indeed, the most distinct feature probably being the half cloverleaf junction. This may have been one of the reasons for changing the layout, because they're not the safest of junctions by modern standards. You end up with a potentially dangerous situation where traffic joining or exiting has to cross over one another. So with the redesign, the A428 to M11 or A14 slip road was closed. From that half cloverleaf ran a rather stupid slip road that's now been removed completely, leaving behind a small ghost slip road leading off of the main carriageway and also a bridge. It's quite easy to make out on aerial images where the slip road used to go. Today it's nothing more than a dirt track, and it's unlikely it'll ever see a vehicle drive down it ever again. Despite a complete redesign of the interchange's layout, they didn't really improve it all that much. Sure, safety standards were now higher, but in terms of moving traffic around, it's no better than before. For example, if you're heading along the M11, you can't join the A428. You've got no choice but to find an alternative and route. I don't understand why you'd spend all of that money building this huge interchange to then not add more traffic links. It's absurd. Still, you can come back at a later date and add those missing links for a load more money. I suppose it's how you keep your job. As we head away from that clusterfuck of an interchange, to begin with, we're actually driving along what used to be the A14 before it was upgraded to the A14. This section was an upgrade applied to an existing dual carriageway road, so all they had to do was fit a few gantries and speed cameras and jobs are good 'un. But of course, it was never going to be that simple. I'll try to keep this brief because it's really boring, but we need to look at why the A14 is a smart motorway, but it isn't. Having been in the planning stages for a few years, someone at the local council thought, why are we messing about with a silly dual carriageway thing when we could build it all as a proper motorway and we could call it the A14M? Everyone thought that was a great idea, so they abandoned the original A road plan and came up with a new one that would make it a smart motorway. And this is why things aren't as simple as they should be. For it to be a motorway required proper grade separated junctions, the removal and rerouting of footpaths and local roads, as well as a whole host of other infrastructure. But that's okay, we've got £1.5 billion to spend somehow. I don't know where they got that, but anyway, the reason they couldn't just add some gantries to this first section of new A14 and call it a day was because they wanted to build it all to motorway specification, and along this section were 3 rather crap junctions, certainly by motorway standards, and all of those would need replacing. Not only that, because motorway, what was previously the A14 would have to be rebuilt alongside as a new road, today known as the A1307. This gives local traffic an option to get about without going on to this new motorway. Just FYI, around here local traffic is tractors and combines. It's all a bit farmy. We're perhaps beginning to understand why this might have been the most expensive 16 miles of road ever built. They were building entirely new roads as well as a motorway. A short distance from the GIRTON interchange is a bridge, and this marks the location of a road junction that was deleted as part of the A14 upgrade. It was no doubt considered unfit for motorway purposes. There is a tiny bit of the junction remaining should you want to explore the area, and I suppose we could say it's an abandoned junction, but most of it has been removed and replaced by balancing ponds. They didn't replace the junction, and instead you're to use the A1307 and make your way up to the next junction, which is the Bar Hill interchange. This junction was also deleted, and looking at the previous layout, this may have been justified, but unlike the previous junction that we looked at, the Bar Hill interchange was replaced by a bigger and better interchange. I say better. There have been several complaints made to National Highways that parts of the junction's bridge structures crossing the A14 are sinking, leading to damaged vehicles. After a year of complaints, not a lot has happened, but National Highways said it's normal for structures like this to settle in such a way, and it's probably fine. They'll keep an eye on it. Just by the Bar Hill interchange is an abandoned Little Chef and the Lulworth service station. We all know what happened to Little Chef, but what of this services that was once complete with a hotel and petrol station? The Little Chef was gone by 2017, the petrol station followed shortly after, and in 2019 the hotel closed down as well, most likely because of the A14's construction. The road used to take you right past the front of the services with slip roads to get in and out, as you'd expect, but the new road wasn't built with the services in mind. In fact, the road cut it off completely with no provisions made for it, so that was that. It closed down and has been sat here ever since, and it'll no doubt one day be turned into housing. Another problem for Lulworth was the competing Cambridge services found a short distance away. It's a lot bigger and better suited to HGV traffic, of which there's quite a lot of on the A14. The services was built in the late 1990s, and interestingly it was constructed with the thought that eventually the A14 would be upgraded, so it sat back as far from the main road as possible. The road certainly was upgraded. What was before a simple yet less than ideal junction was completely removed and replaced with the huge junction that we see today. And interestingly, next to the junction is this vast expanse of land, or hard standing, I'm not sure what the term is, but this huge area was part of an even huger work site that was used during the A14's construction. Materials, workforce and vehicles could all be dispatched from here, and it would have been one of several such sites along the new road. After Cambridge services is the point at which the A14 starts to run along its own new alignment. Until now, you'll recall it was built on the course of the old A14, but that's no longer the case, and what we're dealing with is all new from here. An interesting feature can be found just as you pass under the Connington Road Bridge. Connington Road was completely realigned following the A14's construction, and a small piece of the original road remains in place, albeit now abandoned. But that's not the interesting feature. What's interesting are the newly built slip roads and junction that connect Connington Road to the A14. We could say that this is a secret junction because it's not for use by you or I, but for use by maintenance and emergency vehicles. And I think, for reasons we'll get onto later, it's absolutely stupid. Speaking of stupid, we should probably address the motorway-sized elephant in the room, because what we've looked at so far is all suited to being a motorway, and indeed it all looks like a motorway, doesn't it? But it's not a motorway. As we established earlier, the authorities changed their mind halfway through planning, wanting to make the A14 the A14M. The problem with that is that you can't just build a road and call it a motorway. There are many levels of legislation that need to be put in place, and the thought was that whilst the paperwork was all being sorted, they'd get on with building the motorway and it would all work out in the end. But of course it didn't. The paperwork to classify the road as a motorway was taking the government so long to process and sort out, it was looking like the road's opening would be delayed, and this was unacceptable. Whilst construction was on schedule, waiting months or maybe even years for a piece of signed-off paperwork just wasn't going to work, so they made the decision to abandon the idea of it being a motorway, and it would open as an A road instead. Whilst an A road in name, it's a motorway in terms of design and construction, and to make best use of this, they made the road an expressway, a name given to a road that has some special regulations applied to it. It's basically like a motorway in as much as it has restrictions on the type of traffic that can use it, but you don't need to get the paperwork signed off by the government. And interestingly, whilst it operates like a motorway in that respect, the legislation says that it can't operate like a smart motorway with variable speed limits, so if you see a speed sign illuminated, it's only advisory. Do with that information what you will. At Junction 23, we find a limited access junction that isn't limited access if you're a maintenance or emergency vehicle, because there are slip roads available, just not for us. And like the secret junction from earlier, I think it's stupid, particularly in this case. Why go to the trouble and expense of constructing more slip roads just to not let anyone use them? I understand the point of emergency access and all of that, but if you build a proper junction, that access still exists, and when you inevitably build 10,000 houses next to the junction, the more access the better, surely. In any case, with Junction 23, we're buggered. The unusable slip roads have been built in such a way that means they could never be opened to the public because the corners and turns would be deemed unsafe, and your only option would be a complete rebuild, and that's not going to happen anytime soon. Between Junctions 23 and 22, we're going in reverse, fair enough, is where we find the largest structure on the new A14, the 2,500 foot long River Ouse bridge, which took 18 months to build across boggy marshland and over the East Coast Main Line Railway. It's one of over 30 bridges that had to be built, and it's as ordinary as you like when it comes to bridges. However, it might not be here for long. Like the bridges at the Bar Hill interchange, this one is sinking. In 2024, a lane was closed off, I assumed to carry out some sort of repair works, but I couldn't actually find out what they were doing. Next up is the biggest balls up of the entire road, Junction 22 and the interchange, if you can call it that, with the A1. Let's say you're heading west on the A14 and want to go south on the A1. To do that, you have to join the A1 heading north, take the next exit, go all of the way around the roundabout, and then rejoin the A1 to head south. And as if that wasn't stupid enough, if you're on the A14 heading east and want to join the A1 south, you have to exit the A14 and use the same sodding roundabout to join the A1 south. But wait, we're not done yet. If you're on the A141 and want to join the A14, you have to join the A1 south and merge later with the A14. Can you see how most of the traffic wanting to use the same bit of road might be a problem? Aha, but John, what about these slip roads here on the A14? Surely they allow for traffic from the A141 to at least bypass that A1 situation. These slip roads are for emergency and maintenance vehicles only. Please step aside.
What?
Interestingly though, it wasn't supposed to be this way. The original plans were quite a bit different to what we ended up with. The waste of money slip roads weren't a thing, although the junction they sit on was always going to be a limited access junction. But then if you build the slip roads anyway, just have it as a full access junction. It makes no sense. Anyway, interesting fact, on the new A14 there are more access points for maintenance vehicles than there are normal junctions. Anyway, had the A14 been built as planned, Junction 22 would also have looked quite a bit different with a looped slip road connecting the A14 to the A1 northbound. This layout wouldn't have solved any of the aforementioned issues, but it's more suited to the A14 being constructed to the left of the A1. However, in the end, the A14 was constructed to the right of the A1, and actually, for a short distance, it reuses part of the old A1. Say what? Yeah, they rebuilt the A1 along a new alignment, and what was left over was used on the A14. It's just a shame that whilst they were doing all of this work, they couldn't sort out the access at the junction. It's a proper show in rush hour. Speaking of shit shows, you may have noticed in some of the shots the vast collection of plastic tubes that feature along the A14. Here are some, and every single one serves as a monument to our great leaders' f**k-ups. Over 850,000 trees were planted as part of the new A14, each one encased within these plastic tubes to protect them from damage or wildlife whilst they grow, and that's fair enough. Unfortunately, they're all dead. National Highways blamed everyone but themselves. However, it turns out that they might have been bending the truth a little bit, because the bottom line is that the trees were planted out of season. The real piss take is that National Highways get paid to come back and replant them all over again. It's at least £1 million worth of trees. It didn't work out the first time, so maybe do us a favour, save the money, come back and collect up all of the plastic and call it a day on that. I'm sure nature will take care of the rest, even if there aren't any trees. And there we are, we've covered the length of the new A14 from Cambridge to Huntingdon, one of the most recent and expensive infrastructure projects in the country, built as a motorway, but it's not a motorway. Does it represent good value for money, or did we get shafted? Let me know in the comments. I'd give it a 5 out of 10. Could do better. Thanks for watching. See you guys next time. The thing is, before 2020, the A14, despite being a fairly major road in it... Everybody meet Mervyn. Are you a dickhead?